my tribute. To God be the glory. There's a lot of things that we honor in this country, isn't there? You know, there's a national day dedicated to butter. There's another one dedicated to bacon. We're not here to talk about those. Today we honor our veterans. And it's fitting and proper on so many different levels for us to do that. I'm proud of this church for doing it. Because the young men and women who serve sacrifice a great deal. When I was a young man, Veterans Day had a dual purpose for us because November 11 was also my father's birthday. And so we had a little birthday celebration as usual and made fun of how old he was, and we'd bring the flag out in the morning and put it down at dusk. And then more times than not, my brother and I would dig around in Dad's closet and we'd look for his Army album. He was a veteran, Purple Heart. And we'd look through all the pictures that he took of World War II in the South Pacific. And we'd ask him the inevitable little kid questions that we never seemed to get a satisfactory answer for. So Veterans Day was kind of special for us growing up. But as I got older, it became sort of another day. There were other things that we were interested in. But that changed for me a couple of years ago. As many of you know, I spent 2 years, from 2009 to 2011, I was a civilian advisor with the Army in Afghanistan. And at that time, I went over and I began to understand a little bit more about what the sacrifices and the hardships were that military personnel go through. You know, my son-in-law and I this week, we were kind of laughing about the hurry up and wait mentality. It was probably invented by somebody in the Army. And during those multiple times when I spent waiting, it came to my mind that it wasn't a coincidence that the Holy Spirit inspired the writers of the New Testament to compare the Christian experience to military service. It's all over the New Testament. Paul does quite a bit of those comparisons, metaphors, analogies. Because back then, and the people who were reading those letters, they understood those analogies when everybody's familiar with the putting on the whole armor of God. And so when Paul talked about the helmet and the breastplate and the sword and the shield, people understood those things because it was a very militaristic time in Earth's history. Rome ruled the world. And they enforced their rule with a very large, a very well-organized, and an extremely brutal army. Legions of Rome. But they kept the peace. And so as I began to think about these analogies that were in the New Testament, I began to think about some of the experiences that I was going through overseas, and I want to bring some of those comparisons to you because I think it's important for us to understand. Not only do we say thank you for your service, but what does that service mean? First of all, the great hue and cry in secular society these days is for diversity. Everybody wants diversity, multiculturalism. Everybody gets their chance. Everybody's together and working hard. If you want the best example that I can think of diversity at work and in action, it would be an infantry company, like these young men here. When I got to FOB Boris, a FOB is this isn't working for some reason, Wayne. When I got to FOB Boris, I went to the captain, and he explained to me what the what the operation was, and I had my duties and responsibilities that I was doing. And so as I worked with these young men, I realized that there were a whole lot of diverse people there. We had representatives from every part of the country. We had Yankees from New England. We had Southern boys, lots of Southern boys. Had surfers from California, mountain men from Colorado, farmers and cowboys. We had every color of the rainbow. We had white, black, brown. We had Asian. They were all there to work and to do one simple purpose. Let's roll forward one, please. And that was to represent the United States of America. There were men and women. There we go, now we're cooking. And they were all young. It would usually take them about a month when a new company came in somebody would eventually come to the place where they'd come up to me and they'd say, "Well, sir, how old are you?" And I'd say, "Well, I'm a whole lot older than you are." At that time, I was 61, so 62. But it was fun to get along with them. They were always respectful to me. I tried to get them to call me by my first name, but they never would do it. It was always "sir." But we had every religion also that you could think of. We had, of course, Catholics and Baptists and Lutherans and Episcopalians. Allegedly, there were a couple of atheists, at least until the first shots rang out. Mustafa Omar was a Muslim from Somalia. But he had taken the oath and he had joined the United States Army to do a job. And we have a job that we're doing too. Diversity is a wonderful thing. I don't know if you're familiar, if you remember last year, there was a study that was done of the diversities of the major worldwide religions and religious movements. And you had all of them listed down there, from Muslim on up through Catholic and everywhere else. But at the top of the list, I was very gratified, and I was proud of the fact that the Seventh-day Adventist Church was the most diverse that they found. I was proud of that, and you should be too. Funny thing, though, at the end of the day, everybody looked about the same. And it is so with Christianity. Come on. Incidentally, there are a white guy, a black guy, and a Jew in that picture. James tells us if you really fulfill the royal law according to the Scripture, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. You do well. But if you show partiality, you commit sin and are convicted by the law as transgressors. We know that the Ten Commandments are broken down in our duty to God and our duty to man. But one of the things that we pass over is the fact that partiality or showing bias in any way is against the law also. We can't do it. I am grateful that over the years this church has morphed away from caring about how people look or how they speak or what color they are or how they dress, and is more concerned with whether or not they care about Christ. Because when the end result is that that's all that really matters for us. In order to be in the Army, you have to enlist. This is the re-enlistment of Sergeant Chris Riley. He's still in the Army. He was re-enlisting for another 3-year tour. The lieutenant would pull the platoon into formation. He would read the oath of office. Chris Riley swore to protect and defend the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And then once they swore him in, the platoon put him down on the ground, stretched him out, and gave him a pink belly. You pull up his shirt and slap him real hard until it gets, well, really red. I couldn't find a Christian equivalent for that procedure, but, as we'll go on a little bit. But it is so with Christians. We have an oath of office that we take also. It was read so ably by Andrew Fischel a little bit earlier. In Matthew, Christ, the last thing that he told his disciples, he says, "Look, go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all things that I've commanded you." That's our oath of office. When a person decides to be a Christian, he doesn't just sign on to come in and warm a pew. If that's all there is to it, then I guess we're all in heaven, because this is as close as we're ever going to get. God said, no, I don't want that. What I want you to do is I want you to take what you know. I want you to take what you learn in church. I want you to take it out to people. I want you to prophesy, speak strongly for me, but I want you to go and teach people, and I want you to baptize them. I want them to be full members of my church. Because when you enlist in the cause of Christ, it's not just a passive participation. The other thing, this was our leadership group for ABU Company, 101st Airborne, 3 lieutenants and a captain. These were good leaders. These were people who were trained and they were dedicated and they knew their jobs. But more importantly, they cared more about their men than they did about the job. Did they have to do the mission? Yes, there were missions to do. But they cared so deeply for their men. It was touching to see on many occasions. On the left was Captain McKinney. He was with 25th Infantry Division. He was 31 years old when I worked with him. Captain Watson on the right was 39 years old. Young men responsible for 150 lives, for sending people out on missions that were extremely dangerous. During times when summer and winter, when the weather was inclement, but there was a job to do. And when the orders came down from battalion that this is what we want to accomplish, this is what we have to do, and you're assigned to do that, there was no, well, how about we wait for sunny weather? How about we wait till the rain clears? Everybody strapped on a pack and they took off. Why? Because that's the job that you do. And it is so with Christians. No one engaged in warfare entangles himself with the affairs of this life, that he may please him who enlisted him as a soldier. When we become Christians, our lives change. They should. It's necessary that they do so. We can't just say, I'm going to continue as I was, but I'm not going to pay any attention to what the captain has to say. If you don't pay attention to what the captain has to say, you run into real problems. We have a captain. We have a captain who never makes mistakes, always makes right decisions. I never knew those two young men that I worked for and others who were commanding officers to make a wrong decision or to make one that jeopardized lives needlessly. There is, of course, a jeopardy that attaches to anything that a unit is doing when they're in combat, but to be foolish and to assume that something is going to turn out all right when you do it in a foolish way never occurred when I was working with these men. They always made right decisions. And our captain, we can trust him too. When the orders came down from battalion that this is what we're going to do, people didn't understand necessarily all the ins and outs of, well, why are we going there? I thought we were just over there last week. Why do we have to go back? Nobody questioned those things. They had faith in the command that they had a purpose in mind and that we had to go and do it. Nobody complained about it. And when the captain gave an order, everybody had faith that he was going to do it the best way possible. And they followed him. Because the captains, those two that I showed you, those captains didn't just give an order and send people out. They actually led them. And we don't encumber ourselves with the affairs of this life. When young men and women join the military, they give themselves over to a totally different reality, especially when they're deployed. When you're deployed to a hard and difficult area overseas, everything that you know in this country is gone. I'll show you a couple of those things. In 1 Timothy, we're told, "This charge I commit to you, that you may wage good warfare, having good faith and good conscience, which some having rejected have suffered shipwreck." There was an incident we had with Captain McKinney when he ordered out one of the lieutenants and one of the platoons for an overnight mission. I told him specifically, yes, it's a hot day. This was about 10 o'clock in the morning, and it was really warming up. But he says, the weather is scheduled to drop off severely tonight, so I want you to make sure that all the men have their snivel on. Your snivel is your silk layer. It's your winter clothes. Call them snivel because you got to be a sniveler if you're going to wear that. You know, you got to be tougher than just weather. So So he said, I want you to make sure that all the guys have their cold weather gear. Well, the lieutenant noticed that it was a very hot day. Tomorrow was going to be a hot day and everything too. So in getting everybody prepared to go out on the mission, he forgot to tell us to put on our cold weather gear. That night where we went, it got down to almost freezing. There was a little bit of snow flurries even. And when we got back to the base, sergeants being sergeants from the platoon went to the first sergeant, who sits next to the captain. They told him that there was something that was missing in that patrol. And the next day, that lieutenant was gone. And he was replaced by another lieutenant. Why? Because the orders came down from the captain and he didn't follow them. It's something that's not very common. It does happen. But adjustments are made very quickly. When an order comes down from our captain, do we obey it? Do we obey it fully? Or do we say, maybe I'll wait till next week? I'm not a good quilter, so I'm not even going to go over there and help Dolly. There's always something that we can do. There's always something that we can fulfill. But when the Lord calls us and asks us to do something, when an opportunity comes up to us, do we say no or do we say later? Well, I'm not suited for that. A while ago, we had an opportunity, and it's been quite a while, an opportunity to ask one of the folks in the church to be an elder. And when I went to him, he listened and he said yes. Now, ordinarily, when you go to somebody and ask them to be an elder, you get sort of, well, let me do this or let me think about it, that sort of thing. But this man said, my wife and I agreed a long time ago that when somebody in the church asked us to do something, that was a call from the Lord. And so he said yes immediately. It was shocking. It could have knocked me over with a feather, but it was also extremely gratifying. We don't want to suffer shipwreck because we don't obey the captain. What was life like on FOB Boris? FOB is a forward operating base. We were on the Pakistan border, and I don't even know the dimensions. There were no trucks that came in or went out on convoys. Everything had to be helicoptered in. There was no landing strip there, but there was a helicopter landing zone. This was the restaurant. It's called the DFAC, the dining facility. And it was open 3 times a day during specific times. If you didn't make it there, you went hungry. This was the 7-Eleven that was open sporadically. Sometimes you'd catch it, sometimes you wouldn't. But you can see the quality of the buildings was, so they were quick to put up, but they were easy to take down too. FOB Boris has been bulldozed now. This was the men's and the ladies' room. There were several of them around the base. This is where we washed up in the morning. This is the bathroom. When I talk about a different reality that soldiers go through when they're deployed, this is one of the realities. This is the type of an area that you get away from. Or that you're put into. You don't have the luxury of, I like my shower, I have my own sink, that sort of thing. It doesn't work that way. This was the best shower on the base. Be sure to wear your Crocs. So hardship. What is hardship like when you're out in the field? This is Rachel Talmadge. She was a specialist. She was the medic for 2nd Platoon. During my second tour, I was up on the northern border, which is very hot right now. But back then, it was considered less of a combat area, and so they allowed women to go out on patrols. So Rachel was known affectionately as Mini Doc because she was 5'2", eyes of blue, and she weighed 105 pounds. Now, when she was fully outfitted in battle rattle, with all of her equipment on and carrying the medical supplies for the platoon, she was carrying 85 pounds of equipment. So if you want to experience an equivalent hardship experience, calculate 80% of your weight, put it in a pack, throw it on your back, and go hiking 5 miles next August in Phoenix. You'll probably come close. Never had a complaint. There were times when we would come back off a patrol and captain would say, okay, you guys got to go back out. So, grab something to eat and you've got to go over here and do this. Nobody ever whined or complained. In civilian life, you'd have people saying, oh, can't so-and-so do it? Let George do it. Can't they do it? Can't we wait until tomorrow? How about we catch a couple of Z's and then we'll go, or something, got to freshen up. I never heard that. When you've got dedication from a group of people who are dedicated to a particular purpose and have the right focus in what it is that they're doing, they just go and do it. It was inspiring. Whenever I think that the mattress is getting a little lumpy, I remember Odin. 6'5", trying to sleep on a 5.5-foot Afghan bunk with no mattress and using his rucksack as a pillow. He did go to sleep. That's one of the blessings of the Army, is you can sleep anywhere and under any conditions, even standing up. When I think it would be nice to have a larger screen TV, so I can really see a lot of the things on the football games, I remember these guys watching a movie on one of the guys' cell phones. They were all clustered together and laying on one another. They did it for like an hour, hour and a half before they caught a nap. Right after I snapped this picture, Newsy, the guy that's, there in the foreground, he looks up and he says, "Come on down, sir, we got room." It warms your heart, but I convinced him that concrete and old bones really just don't mix very well. This is one of my favorite pictures. This is Williams' 4th Platoon. Whenever we would go out on a mission to clear a village or to have a meeting with the village elders, it was necessary to set up a security perimeter so that there wouldn't be any uninvited guests. And on this side of this particular village, the best vantage point that Williams could find was the village compost heap. And so he hopped right in. There was no hesitation. He stayed there for an hour, hour and a half. And I had to ride back to the base in the same truck that he was in, and I'm going to tell you, there was a lot of fresh material in that compost heap. Once he got inside, they had to hose him down before anybody let him in his bee hut to change his clothes. But he never gave it a second thought. When you have a task to do, you just go ahead and do it. Probably the hardest life over in Afghanistan that I witnessed was Margah. Margah was a COP, C-O-P, a combat outpost. It was smaller than a FOB, because a FOB had a platoon or a company in it. Margah would only accommodate a platoon, about 25 guys, and some Afghans. It's a little hard to see in this picture, but if you had a reasonably good throwing arm, you could chunk a rock from one end of Margah to the other. Even if you had a crummy throwing arm, you probably could still do that. Margah got rocketed every day. 3 or 4 times a week, they would take small arms fire from the surrounding communities and from the countryside. A couple times a month, they would take heavier fire from large caliber weapons and mortars. And every couple of months, the enemy would mass 100 to 150 fighters and try to overrun the compound. They never did, but they came close a few times. Margah had no power except for a small generator, gasoline-powered generator, that kept the radios going, and there were a few lights here in the main bunker. There was also no running water. So when we went up to Margah, we had to carry our drinking water and a lot of baby wipes to kind of, clean up, kind of keep the stink down a little bit, which really didn't work too well because you still had to put on the same uniform. There was no water and no power, so there's no way to wash uniforms or clothing. And this was for a 30-day period. One day when we were there, we got rocketed and they blew up the fuel bladder. Just kind of like 4th of July came early that year. So what did we eat? We didn't have a DFAC, we didn't have a kitchen, there was no hot food, but we had MREs, meals ready to eat. How many of you veterans ever ate K-Rats? Let's hear C-Rats. MREs, yummy, weren't they? Not chip approved. I just want to make that clear. About 3,000 calories, and even at my age, they went down pretty good, and I burned them up pretty quick. MREs have a 25-year shelf life, something like that, and I'm fairly certain that I ate several that had gone out of date. But that was life at Margaux. This was the 4th of July celebration at Margaux in 2010. Everybody gathered around and they cooked up French fries. You got some potatoes down at the local bazaar, had French fries. Everybody got 8 French fries. Happy 4th of July. But you'll notice everybody's smiling. Why? It's funny, but when you're all suffering the same, everybody's got a sense of humor. It may be a little sick, but it's there. This was the men's room at Margaux. There was no ladies' room. That's hardship. And in Timothy, the Bible tells us that we're going to suffer hardship. You, therefore, must endure hardship as a good soldier of Jesus Christ. When you came to the Lord, did all of your hardships cease? All your problems go away? It's all clear skies, blue skies, no rain in your life, right? How many stories have we heard about people who have had difficulties with their jobs? Can't work on a Sabbath, can't work here. Almost as many stories as we hear about people who turn to the church or become church members, become active in the church, and their families forsake them or their friends turn away from them, don't want to support them anymore. Back in the 60s, they called them Jesus freaks. I don't know what they call them now, but it still happens. You're going to start being religious, but we haven't got a place for you. It's hardship. Sometimes it's more pronounced in some lives, but Christ told us that life was going to be difficult, and we have to prepare ourselves for it. Focus. On the left is Lieutenant Roberts. On the right, Sergeant Rixey. Sergeant Rixey was one tough dude. We were coming back from a walking patrol one day, and Lieutenant thought it would be fun to challenge everybody in the platoon to a race the last 300 meters to the front gate. And so he sent out the big challenge, and everybody started running. I didn't run. But everybody started running, or most of the people started running. When we got inside the main gate and everybody had secured all their equipment, Rixey and Roberts went nose to nose, screaming at each other for 5 solid minutes. It was an extraordinary event. It sticks with me for a couple of reasons. Rixey's position was, as sergeant, he was responsible for the welfare of the men, and you don't run men in full packs in 100-degree plus weather for no reason. There's a certain common sense to that. Also, 3 or 4 of the guys who were in the unit, who were in the platoon, were replacements, and Rixey hadn't gotten them yet into combat shape. So he says, it's wrong for you to do this. Lieutenant's position was a lot simpler. It's my platoon, I'll do what I want. And the 2 of them went at it for 5 minutes, screaming at the top of their lungs, about that far away from each other. What was extraordinary about this exchange was that at no time did anybody use profanity or make a personal attack against the other person. You know, I thought about that since. Everybody sort of drifted away, but it didn't matter because you could hear them all across the compound. But it was extraordinary for a couple of reasons. First of all, you know, the Army exists on PowerPoint presentations and dirty language. And for these men to sit there and ad nauseum reinforce their points to one another, but without any kind of a personal attack or without any profanity, it was mind-boggling to me. How were they able to do it? They had focus. They were focused on something bigger than some petty difference that they had, and it was petty. Although I'll tell you, we never had any more foot races afterward. At the end of the argument, the 2 men went back to their to the platoon area. They went to dinner together, and the next day we ran another mission, and it was like nothing happened. But again, we didn't run anymore. Because these two men had focus. Their focus wasn't on some nitpicking little administrative issue or some standard operating procedure or some regulation. The focus when you are in a position like this is to, one, complete your mission, and two, bring everybody back alive. That's all that mattered. Everything else was completely insignificant. And they both realized this. So although they had their argument, they cleared it up, and we went on with life. And it is so with Christians. I discipline my body and bring it into subjection, lest when I have preached to others, I myself should be disqualified. If we call ourselves Christians, do we have differences of opinion? Oh, yes. Last year was a real humdinger, wasn't it? And we have differences of opinion in the denomination, in the North American division, in the conferences, and we have differences of opinion in this church. But I would submit to you that any issue that we have that bears on how we conduct our business or administration or operating procedures are absolutely insignificant in the face of the focus that we ought to have, and that is on salvation. If we're not focused on salvation for ourselves and for our fellow church members, then we're missing the point. We lose when we're not united. I would take this time to say that if anybody in this congregation has anything against another brother or a sister, if somebody stepped on your toes or if you've stepped on somebody else's toes, that's the devil saying, I'm going to fix this so that you guys don't get along. It's the devil's job, and he does a marvelous job of it, making sure that we're offended by the least little things. Go to your brother or sister and square it. At this time in Earth's history, we don't have the time to be fooling around with insignificant, nonsensical, small things. What's mostly important is that we love one another. Because when we say we're Christians and people see that we're bickering, we're disqualifying ourselves from talking to anybody else about being a Christian. And it also stands in the way of our salvation and whether or not we're ever going to get to heaven. Before every mission, a platoon would get together, or a company. Whoever was going out would get together and check equipment, look at each other, make sure everybody was fit. They would occasionally tell me that I had to do this or that, to make sure that I didn't rattle too much when I was out running around. But everybody got together and they decided who had what jobs. The officers and the sergeants would come together and they'd say, okay, if there's an issue that comes up, this is how we're going to handle it. This is the formation we're going to use when we walk outside the wire today. If there's a difficulty or a danger, or we start taking fire from a particular direction, this is how we're going to move. This is what we're going to do. And because these young men were so well trained, I never felt unsafe being outside the wire with them. I felt it was more dangerous inside the wire because you're sitting still and people rock at you. But when you're outside and you're moving all the time, it seems like you're safer. Maybe that's just me. But anyway, everybody would get together and decide, okay, this is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to conduct this mission. And as we moved, whenever somebody would take a break, whenever the captain would call and say, okay, everybody's going to rest up, take 10 minutes or whatever, everybody was still on high alert. Why? Because we were out on a mission. We were doing a job that we had to pay attention to. Everybody's heads were on a 360-degree swivels. You had to keep looking around you. And it's so with Christians. Everybody's familiar with the text that says that the devil is like a roaring lion seeking whom he may devour. While we had lions out here in the field, there are lions right here in this city. There are lions in our lives. There are lions that the devil puts in our path to devour us. There's a devil out there who will snatch your crown away if you let him. But if you're focused on the mission, if you're focused on salvation, if you're focused on Christ as the leader of your life, then that line is going to disappear. But it's important to have friends to look out for you too. We have to move together as a church. You hear about the parts of the body. We have a lot of parts of the body in this church, but parts of the body don't matter if that part doesn't feel like working that day. You say, yeah, I'd like to lift that, but, I'm going to take the day off. Or, yeah, I'd like to kick that parcel, but, my foot's sore. I'm not going to go out today. There are different analogies that we can use, but when you're out in the field and you're fighting for Christianity, when you're fighting for your faith, it's a lot easier when we do it together. There is no substitute in the Christian church for unity. Doctrine won't do it. Prayer won't do it. Only prayer and unity will accomplish our purpose. And all the young men came together. It seemed like after the end of every mission, everybody come together and take a picture. It was all togetherness. Remember, I was telling you about Margah. It was touching the way that soldiers took care of each other. Without being told, when Margah would rotate out, a platoon would come down from Margah every 30 days. We'd rotate another one up, another group would come down. Whenever the guys from Margah came in, spontaneously, nobody on the base washed their clothes for 2 or 3 days. They let the guys from Margah wash theirs. And believe me, they needed it. When it came time to go to the DFAC and have dinner, if there was somebody from Margah who walked in the door, everybody stepped aside. He went to the head of the line. Why? Margah. We were taking showers and we went in. If there were guys from Margah who came in and they were lining up to take a shower, everybody just sat there and said, go ahead. Because in a place like that, you ran out of hot water pretty frequently, and so we wanted to give those guys the hot water without being told. Many times I saw young men rush out of positions of relative safety out to places of extreme danger in order to help a friend. No orders given. Simply a spontaneous action, instantaneous. It didn't stop to think about it. Afterwards, some of those young men would say, if I stopped to think about it, I probably wouldn't have done it. But they went out spontaneously. Why? Because there was a brother who was in trouble. There is nothing more important for us as a church, as a congregation, than to keep our eyes and our ears open, and when you know that a brother or a sister is in trouble, that we respond instantaneously. We go on out there and we help them. We ease their suffering. We take them a plate of food. We give them a couple of bucks because they're hungry that day. There is no substitute for unity. And that's what causes togetherness. In the book Early Writing, Ellen White relates that she saw the people of God moving up a highway toward heaven. There was darkness all around. And as they moved up, the road became narrow and narrow until it was just a little tiny footpath. And people kept looking toward the light of heaven, and some people would get discouraged, or they would get worried about the path, or they took their eyes off of heaven and off Christ, and they fell off the path and they were lost in the darkness. But those who kept their eyes on the goal, kept their eyes on the prize, they were safe. And all the while, a voice kept telling them, press together, press together. Again, I'll say it, in this time of Earth's history, this is not the time for us to be pulling separately. We have to move together. At the end of the day, there's always happiness, there's always joy, there's always some fun that you can have. This was me accepting the trophy for civilian achievement. That's Sean Corbett. He's now a captain in Special Forces, so I wouldn't do that to him now. But our linchpin as Christians is, as I have loved you, that you also love one another. By this all men will know that you're my disciples, if you have love for one another. And how do we manifest love? Is it just doing a couple of nice things, passing out some happiness here and there? Love is when we care more for other people than we care for ourselves. And I saw that demonstrated so many times in the military. So what does Veterans Day mean to me now? It used to be just kind of a day to celebrate, take a little bit of time, look through my dad's album, that sort of thing. Am I grateful? Am I thankful for servicemen's service? Am I grateful? Thank you for your service? Yeah. But it's much more than that, because that phrase has become kind of trite and overused, and it's sort of lost its meaning. Am I grateful for their service? Yes. But after working with these young men for a couple of years, what I'm more grateful for is for the example that they set for me. I'm grateful for the hardships that they endure and the sacrifices that they make. And as a Christian, I'm grateful that they remind me of who I am and who I ought to be.